Amy, I am so excited for this conversation. I want to put this in context for my audience. You and I met online as people do these days. And we were, I would say, fast friends, like
Absolutely.
instant connection, instant chemistry. And we had a conversation on your beautiful podcast a little
Mhm.
while ago that I so enjoyed. And I think one of the things I said to you when we met is that, funny enough, like I think everyone kind of has a sense of what emotional intelligence is, but I meet so few women who are speaking about emotional intelligence in the ways that you do.
Mhm.
And the really unique, I think one of the things I loved about your work immediately is that you bring a voice to the voice. It's all about helping women use their voice, and you do it in such practical ways, really funny ways. Like if you guys don't know Amy, you're definitely going to want to know her after this
Oh,
conversation. She's got a gorgeous website. Like everything you do is just is world class. I really love it.
thank you.
And I've seen some of your speaking reels, incredible speaker. You're all of those things. But what I'd love to start with is if you could tell my audience in your own words, who you are, how you see yourself and your work in the world.
Sure. So my name is Amy Green Smith, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's so interesting how internet friendships work, where you just, you're a guest on various podcasts, and sometimes you connect with folks, sometimes you don't, but when you do, my God, it's such magic. So I completely echo your sentiments. So I am a courageous communication coach. I've been working in the personal development space for a good 15 years now. And really what I do in the world is kind of twofold. It's an internal component of genuinely believing in your own intrinsic enoughness, worthiness, that just essentially that you matter, right? Our sense of self-worth. And then the external component of how then do I communicate with the outside world? So if I now believe that my voice matters, or I believe that I'm enough, how does that influence the conversations that I have with my mother-in-law or with my colleagues? So I have found that in personal development, and I'm sure you see this all the time too, you and I have this in common, where a lot of times there will be really great concepts that are thrown out, like just speak up for yourself or just believe in yourself. And it's like, well, how the fuck do I do that? Like there's no real linear rubric or
Mhm.
step-by-step or pedagogy around here's how we actually get from point A to point B. So a lot of what I do is very linear, very step-by-step process around what does it look like to have a tough conversation? What are the actual phases of that? What does it look like to say no or to establish a boundary without feeling an onslaught of guilt? Which then obviously we have to talk about the emotional intelligence element, right? Because so often the way we communicate is rooted in emotion. So the more we have vocabulary around that and are able to articulate that, the more evolved our actual relationships can be.
I love this. And like, I'm sure my audience is listening and is thinking, oh my God, this is Shamla's soul sister, because we really are. And I love that. I love that in a space that can feel so saturated, when you find another voice that is so in alignment with what you're teaching and you're preaching and you're really sharing with the world. I love the inside out aspect of what you do. I think that is so important, and I think, um, one of the things I think you and I talked about was emotional intelligence has traditionally been used in the corporate sector, for C-suite employees who are still traditionally men. And how do we nuance this conversation for women? How do we actually understand that so much of what makes it difficult for us to stop people pleasing, which is what we're going to talk about today, and so much of what gets in the way of us actually being assertive, has to do with our internal world. It has to do with that worthiness piece. And I love that you have connected that and you bring that to the forefront and you really highlight that in your work with people.
Absolutely, because I think it's not uncommon for us to look at sort of the external piece of the problem. We start to analyze the symptoms. So what that typically looks like for most people is my relationship hurts, right? My workplace hurts. It hurts over here. It hurts in this friendship. But we don't actually look at the internal elements that influence that system or that symptom. So I think it's common and easy for us to stand in a place of blame. Like, if only my partner would get their shit together, then I could just be fine. Or if only my boss wasn't so overbearing, then I could succeed. You know, we default to this blame piece. But again, that's a piece of understanding our emotional current. What's really happening there that we're leaning into that blame? And the situation with blame far often is that it locks us into a place of victimhood where we go, I can't possibly be happy unless that person magically changes, which we have zero control over. So then it becomes, okay, what in this circumstance, with regards to the scenario that I'm immersed in, what can I do? What is within my power? And all of that is kind of the internal work that we work on.
I love it. I love it. I think it's the most important place to start really any work is the internal piece. Let's jump right into our topic. I have some questions I really would love your insight on. And the first thing is it's a question similar to what you asked me actually when we started chatting on your podcast. Is how do you define people pleasing? I don't want to assume that we all have the same definition and understanding of people pleasing. How do you define it?
Yeah, this is interesting because I find that there are oftentimes folks who either really ascribe themselves as a people pleaser. They kind of go, oh yeah, totally. That's absolutely me. And then there are others who envision somebody being a people pleaser being really meek and mild and maybe a sort of a repressed posture, who doesn't speak up, who allows everyone to walk all over them. And I think that's a really myopic view of what people pleasing is. So the way I define it is truly anytime that we care so much about the opinions of others that there's a sacrifice of self. So it's either I sacrifice what I really want, what my needs are, what my opinions are, things that I'm feeling, like if something is offensive and I choose not to speak up about it, all the way to what are people going to think about the outfit that I'm wearing, or how I presented at that specific meeting. So I really think it's about an investment in other people's opinions at some sort of cost of self. So when I talk about speaking up and giving voice to things, your wants, opinions, and needs, it's not just for the fuck of it. It's not some arbitrary personal development exercise. It's because quite literally your self-worth is dependent on that. So every time we silence ourselves and we hide or we shift or we twist or contort, what we are doing is we're sending that subconscious message to our minds over and over and over again that my wants, opinions, and needs just don't matter as much as the other person. Now, when that becomes cyclical and habitual, and we do that over and over again, no wonder you don't fucking believe in yourself. No wonder you think you can't get your business off the ground. No wonder you don't tell your partner what you really want to do with your career. No wonder, right? Like it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. So the self-worth element is so directly tied with why we people please and how that shows up.
Yes. I'm just curious about something. In your work, do you find that making that connection between our own sense of worthiness and our tendency to people please, do you find that that is like our women or your clients, are they shocked to learn that? Is that surprising to the people that you work with when you help them make that connection?
Yes, because here's what happens, I think, and this is also disproportional to women, and even more so for women of color or who are in another marginalized identity, like a disabled body or a queer body, is we think that people pleasing is fucking noble. We think that it's honorable, right? It's how we're supposed to show up. We're taught from a very, very early age that we have to caretake for everyone else's emotions, right? So if somebody appears discontented, It's up to us to fix it. So we've been told, largely through media propaganda starting in the 50s, that we are supposed to start caretaking for everybody, that that's our role. So we have equated that with being a good woman or being noble, or that it's honorable. And conversely, if we speak up or if we are demonstrative in some way, now we're a bitch.
Yeah.
Now we're trying to take over, or it's somehow extremely negative.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to push back for folks and just say, okay, first of all, you've been conditioned to believe that it's your responsibility. We've been conditioned to believe that people pleasing is so noble. But I like to say, if you are constantly and consistently putting everybody in front of yourself, that is poison disguised as nobility.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. It's, it's interesting, Amy. Like, I feel like again, people pleasing is a term that we hear a lot. It's tossed around a lot. And I don't think we have a really clear grasp often on how deep this goes, how systemic the issue is. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about following you on Instagram, is that you really, like, I see this systemic approach to the work that you do. Like, you're taking into consideration how these concepts land for different populations and how they affect different populations. And I have to say, as a woman of color, really appreciate that about how you choose to use your platform. I think it's really powerful. And I think you bring this really beautifully layered understanding to the concepts that we're talking about.
Thank you for saying that. It's something that I'm really trying to stay abreast to and continue to grow and to continue to learn as somebody who has incredible privilege as a white woman. And the thing that I really want to underline specifically about people pleasing as it applies to various marginalized identities, we develop a sense of people pleasing for an element of protection, right? Like, we don't ever go out and say, okay, I'm going to placate this partner or this best friend or this colleague so that it takes my self-worth takes this massive hit. Nobody fucking does that. We're doing it in order to stay safe. Now, if we look at even the origin of people pleasing and how it really is a modern iteration of our fear response of fawning. So, we have fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is sort of, obviously, a little bit newer on the landscape, but it's this idea that if we are in impending doom or danger, that we will try to placate the aggressor. So if we're talking about primitive man, we're talking about a tiger coming after you or a bear coming after you. To fawn would be to say, oh, okay, here, kitty, kitty, or here, sweet little teddy bear, here's some food. So just like all of our fear responses, we have modern iterations, and the modern iterations of the fawn response is people pleasing. So there are times when people pleasing will absolutely save your ass, will keep you safe. So I don't think that it's helpful to demonize any of these behaviors that we actually can utilize for self-protection. So for example, I happen to be queer. I'm very straight presenting because I'm married to a cis man, but I am not straight. So if I was amongst a group of people who were very anti-LGBTQ, in that moment, if I'm surrounded by a group of folks like that who are vehemently opposed and violent, for me to get up on my soapbox and say, like, my voice matters and queer lives, deserve a voice, like, that's probably not the space for me to be exercising that, right? So our first item of business is always going to be self-preservation. So the advice that I give my students who are in abusive marriages around thoughtful communication is going to be wildly different than somebody who's just trying to have a tough conversation with a family member where there's not abuse or danger present. So I think it's worth underlining that there are times when people pleasing or shape shifting or code switching is going to actually keep you safe.
Yes.
And I think as a personal development sphere, we have to acknowledge different lived experiences.
We have to. Yeah.
And how
This
these
is the
layer on it.
conversation. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I got a little emotional just listening to you. I mean, the compassion that you bring to this conversation, I think that's what's so often missed, right?
Yeah.
Is that understanding. It's that really seeing people where they are.
Thank you for that. Oh, I just love you. But I think that's one of the places that we miss in personal growth is we take different topics or concepts like perfectionism or people pleasing, or even negative self-talk, and we demonize them and we say, you can't ever stand in a place of perfectionism. You can't ever be a people pleaser. And I think we're far more nuanced than that.
Yes.
One of the things that stood out to me a lot around this concept and sort of the whitewashing of personal development was listening to Brene Brown and Tarana Burke talk about their most recent book. Oh gosh, now it's escaping me the name of their book.
They wrote a book.
You Are Your Best Thing.
Okay. Yeah.
You Are Your Best Thing. And so it's a collaboration of essays from persons of color. And one of the things that they talk about is how Brene talking about vulnerability, the concept of vulnerability, was really, really difficult for some folks to wrap their head around, because vulnerability actually meant aggression and death and danger. And so, us white people being like, hey, just be vulnerable. It's like, well, fuck all the way off at that. That has not worked in my experience. Right. So I just think it's important to have this conversation in a much broader lens.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I think, I mean, we were not planning on going here today, but I'm so glad that we did, because I think these are the layers and the nuances that really are missing from the conversation, and they're so important. And one of the evolutions I'm beginning to see in the personal development space is that it's not just this cheerleading, rah, 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 constantly being on that energy, but really allowing ourselves to slow down as coaches and as mentors, inviting our audience to slow down with us and explore things from a much more compassionate lens, right? With a lot more understanding and a lot more space for the variety of human experiences.
That's right. That's right. And I think the idea of compassion is another one of those concepts that we go, I like that idea, but what does that really look like? So for me, what that looks like as it relates to other people, I have sort of my own sort of internal barometer. And that is, if my instinct or my first gut response is to roll my eyes, like, oh, gosh, I can't believe they're offended by that. Or I can't believe that's what they're going. I can't believe that's a big deal. That is my entry point. That is my go-to entry point to go, okay, you are dismissing what someone's experience is. That doesn't mean I have to agree. Compassion does not mean I have to agree.
Yes.
But it can mean I see your human experience, and I don't negate your emotional current.
Yes.
And when we get to a place where we say, I don't give a shit about what you feel, that is a dangerous, dangerous place to reside. So
what you just said for me is emotional intelligence. This is what it means to be emotionally intelligent. It's not this thing that happens in a silo. It's not just about self-management and how I manage my own internal world. It's how do I then interact with the world around me? And can I bring a level of compassion and understanding and humanity and not knowing and always learning and all of that stuff to the process?
That's right. That's right. And there's another element here that I think is really important. And that is, I'm sure you see this too, where people really want to be done, right? We
Mm,
want to have completed our personal growth journey. Like, I've done all the therapy, I've done all the classes, I'm cured. I'm going to respond to every situation the most astutely and the most evolved. And that's just not the case. And so I think the more we look at, where do I still have sticking points? Where do I still lose my power? Where do I still shut down my voice? Those are the moments where we can kind of push against the edges and continue to grow.
I could not agree with you more. And I can't remember how old you are, Amy. Like I'm 45.
Mhm.
The older I get, the more layers to the work I find,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, and I think that's one of the beauties. Honestly, it's like it's one of the biggest blessings of what we do is that um, we are always doing the work ourselves
That's
in
right.
order to lead the work, right? Like we must. It's the only way.
And I think we're also seeing this a lot with our current economic issue and the influx of COVID and stuff, where new trauma will kick up old trauma. So you
Mm,
might have a few years where you're chilling and you're doing just great. And then you get presented with something that is traumatic in a way that reminds you of the way that your mother spoke to you, or it starts kicking up some of the same emotions that you felt as a child or a teen or in your first marriage. And so you go through this phase of like, I thought I already fucking dealt with this. And it's just a new edge. It's just a new place for you to
yes.
push up against and to grow. And I also think our resilience and the gestation period shrinks considerably. So the
Yes.
things that may have taken us years to learn now set us back for like a month or so, right?
Yes.
Like our bullshit tolerance gets considerably less. So just because you bump up something that you're like, I thought I've already dealt with this, and this happens a lot in speaking up or dealing with people pleasing, where it's like, oh, I thought I already became confident. I thought I learned how to speak up for myself. And now I'm dealing with somebody who I find wildly intimidating or is pushing me in a different way. Maybe they say things passive aggressively, and you're not used to navigating that sort of a communication style. We're always going to get presented with new opportunity. So yes, I think you can go through that phase where you're like, God damn it, I can't believe this is here again. Again, I'm never going to tell you not to feel how you feel. Allow that frustration, but then let's move beyond and go, okay, what's the learning here at this edge?
Yes. Yes. I absolutely love that understanding of the work, that it is never ending. It is literally evolution over a lifetime if we allow it to be.
Mhm.
What I'd love to sort of wrap up our conversation with before we tell our audience how they can find you and all the amazing things that you're doing is, can we talk about for the woman that's listening? So many of my listeners, I would say, are professional, they're women, professional women, entrepreneurs. Some of them are coaches, practitioners, clinicians. What would you say to the woman who has probably already done some of her own work? My audience, most of them, we've done some of our own work. Maybe we've been in therapy. Maybe we've read all the personal growth books and all the things,
Yeah.
and yet we're stuck in this particular area, this area of people pleasing, really owning our worth. What is a small step that she can take that can help her to really sort of sink her teeth into these ideas and these concepts?
Sure. So there's a couple of things. One is just kind of a blanket concept that I would like to introduce to everybody, and I call it hitting the mat. So a lot of what we do in personal growth is a relaying of concepts or ideas, right? So it's so easy to get to this place where we just consume, consume, consume. And what that is like is reading a bunch of books on Pilates or watching all these videos on Pilates and being like, why don't I have ripped abs? Why don't I have a strong core? Because you have to hit the mat. So
Mm.
you have to look at the actual application. So if somebody presents a concept to you, and this is the onus is on us to give you those very specific tactics. But if somebody is presenting a concept around people pleasing or presenting a concept around, vulnerability, it's important that you ask yourself, okay, what is my action step? What would it look like for me to actually hit the mat? So if we're talking about what does it look like to hit the mat through the lens of people pleasing, the first thing that you can do is take an inventory of the things and the people that you chronically complain about. I'm
Yeah.
not talking about just venting or, releasing some frustration. I'm talking about the boss that you constantly complain about. You come home, your partner gets an earful, but yet you've never said anything to the boss. Or it's your best friend who gets an earful about all the things you're pissed off about with your partner, but yet you haven't addressed it with them. So if there's something that you habitually complain about and haven't taken action on, it's likely that you're speaking up, you're just speaking up to the wrong person. So usually we can follow the emotion, right? We can follow the angst, the frustration, the things that feel really emotionally uncomfortable. And we can go, okay, what is it that I'm feeling here? And how have I been stifling my voice with this particular person? So that really gives you sort of a lens of like, oh, here's the instance that I need to actually take some action on. Here's where I need to hit the mat. And then it becomes about, what are the things that I actually need to say to this person? What do I need them to hear? And one of the other sort of funnels that you can run this through is the mantra of, I will not allow my silence to make me a liar.
Mm.
So are there ways that I have been silent or complicit when that actually was offensive to me, or I don't think that's a good business move, or I don't want our kids to go to that school, or, where are those things where you've allowed your silence to make you a liar? That will usually give you the framework of, these are the things that I need to advocate for.
Mm.
And then, I have a shit ton of resources on what that actually sounds like. So we can get into that later, but that's just sort of a baseline of where you can start.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. And we're going to actually jump into your resources now. So that's perfect. So, two final questions for you. One, the question that I'm sure everyone is wondering is, where can people find you? How can they stay connected to your work? Tell us a little bit about that. And the second one is more of a fun one that we had the conversation just off camera is, where do you buy your glasses?
Yes.
If you're only listening to this, you're going to want to go back and watch the YouTube on this. So you can, and we'll just go find her on Instagram. You'll see her incredible style.
Oh, you're so sweet. So you can find me over at amygreensmith.com, and green is just like the color. So there's no E, amygreensmith.com. And you'll see I have tons of freebies. I'm a hypnotherapist as well. So we've got some great free hypnosis tracks for you, but I have a free workbook that is comprised of 9 different challenges that you can do to help you really hit the mat, like we were talking about today. And they're designed to help kind of catapult your self-worth and your self-confidence. And that ebook is called Speak Up for Yourself Without Being a Dick.
Mm.
And you can find that over on my site. I've also been doing a podcast for 9 years where we talk a lot about these sorts of practical tips. And I think I hang out the most like any respectable Gen Xer on Instagram. I'm almost 43, so we're very close in age. So yeah, Insta is my drug of choice. And I get my glasses. I don't even know the proper way to say it, but it's spelled like Vogue me. It's like Vogue,
Oh.
like the word Vogue, but with 2 O's that they use to make like glasses.
Yep.
I don't know how it's actually pronounced, but yeah. So I really love them because now I have to do all progressives.
Yep. That happens.
Yeah. Cause now I'm like, oh, can't see that and that. So, but I was always so thwarted by just your average retailer because I'm like, nothing is funky enough. Nothing is funky enough. and I need them giant. So I also really like Zenni Optical too, or Zenni, I think it's pronounced. So they're great as well.
You are dishing the goods on passion, emotional intelligence, people pleasing, all the things. Amy, thank you so, so much for this conversation. For my audience, we're going to link up all of your freebies and all the places where people can find you in the show notes. But thank you so much for such a lovely conversation.
Oh, likewise, my friend. I've had such a sublime time.